Hey, Rick, how's it going?
Hey, Doug. Good. Good. How are you today?
Good. Hey, I was in a meeting with some government officials, specifically it was FBI and DOJ and a couple others, and the whole conversation around fraudulent wire transfers came out. And I realized, like, hey, I'm a cyber guy, like I should know a lot about this, and realize I don't get engaged on a lot of these topics unless it's a business email compromise, right? BEC is often the source of some of those fraudulent wire transfers. And then I started reading the 2021 Internet Crime Report from the FBI. It's a great resource. We'll put a link in here for that as well. And realize there's lots of things that happen, kind of outside of the business email compromise that really the audience should have a good understanding of. Things I didn't understand, I started drilling in, asking a lot of questions, had a great group of about 20 people in the room that were really willing to provide a lot of information, but a lot of it really came back down to some basic things. So I'll turn it over to you for a second. I mean, give me a little bit of snippet on what you're seeing and what you see in the world right now.
Yeah. So, I mean, looking at that report, this is actually the type of attack, fraud, that causes the most economic damage. And we're seeing this all over. We've had clients who have contacted us where their customers, investors, have been tricked into doing fraudulent wires. Sometimes it's through a business email compromise. Sometimes it's through an email that looks similar, like they'll put an I instead of an L, or vice versa in a name. And it is very prevalent, and a lot of people don't want to admit that they've been tricked by it. But it's also preventable, and we can talk about that.
Yeah, and I think maybe let's take a step back and talk about what it is first, right? Because, when you really think about the conversation of a wire transfer fraud, it's when somebody convinces another person, typically, or they're able to hack a system, hack a access to actually initiate a transfer of funds and so forth under the account of the business in which the target is. And so the catch there is not everybody in the organization has the ability to initiate an actual fund transfer, right? So you've got to get to the right people to actually initiate that. It's not like they can just pick up the phone and call customer support and say, hey, initiate a transfer. They've typically got to get to like a CFO, a CEO, your accounting department of a larger organization. If they're able to compromise systems, maybe initiate a conversation or a request directly from their systems to the bank, those types of things. Is that generally a good definition of what we're talking about here?
Yeah, although I'd say 99 out of 100 times they're not the ones initiating that request directly. They're tricking people into initiating it on their own. That's and that has a lot of implications.
Yeah, and I think the trick here too is in almost all aspects, when you're tricking somebody to do something, it becomes part of a social engineering attack, right? And so
Absolutely.
My easiest, most credible way, going back to your earlier point, my most credible way is if I can get into an email account of somebody and initiate it. So it's not a fake email, it's not a weird IP address, it's not a weird domain, it's none of those things. It's a legitimate email within my domain from somebody I know in the organization, most likely, that is telling me to do something. And very frequently, they're doing it in a urgent manner. Hey, I'm the CEO. You need to pay this guy. He's been calling me 3 times a day. We've been late on payments in the past. Something that creates a sense of urgency as to why they need to do it. Don't pick up the phone and call me. Don't challenge me. Just go ahead and do this quickly.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It can also be to a customer. I've seen it happen with some asset management funds with their investors, where they don't send an email to ask for an investment or to ask for somebody to send money. They do it a different way, but they get into an email account and they send it, and somebody does it anyway. Yep. So it's coming from a legitimate place, as you said, and there's a trick involved, and if you do enough of them, 99 people might not do it, but one does it, and there's $1 million or $10 million or whatever it is, and there's enough volume here. They do enough of this that it's just highly effective.
Yeah, and you said something in there specifically around investors. One of the interesting things I've seen in the world of fraud is a lot of these happen when there's change to the business. They got acquired, they got a new investment, they change banks, whatever those things are that create an opportunity where may take down the guard a little bit of the person that the request is going to.
Yeah, and that's especially if they've done a business email compromise. So what that means is, and you can probably describe it a little better, but that means that they've actually compromised the credentials to get into an email. A lot of times it'll be Office 365 or something like that, and they'll get in there, and then they read the email traffic, and they know what's going on, and they know when something big is happening, and they send it out then. And it's from a legitimate place, and they have the email traffic, so they'll even copy that, so it looks legitimate because it is an actual legitimate email that had gotten sent out somewhere. And so they'll be very opportunistic and do it that way. Yeah.
And if you look at a person that realizes that they just made a mistake, like what would be some of the things that they were looking for that they may have realized, hey, I just made a mistake because I saw something, I felt something a little bit more, raise my spidey senses a little bit more than a normal thing.
Yeah. So, I mean, look, there are a lot of things, where we tell people with phishing email, to look for something that doesn't look quite right or something like that. But there's a far, far simpler way of preventing this. This is completely preventable if you do the right things.
Which are?
Okay. So get ready for some really complicated cyber. Remember, I'm a lawyer. So really complicated cyber. Okay. So you get the email that says wire to this, bank account number, and you pick up the phone, and you don't use the number that's in the email. You actually look their number up, and you call, and you say, I want to confirm that you need me to wire $1.5 million to this account. And if they say, what are you talking about? Don't wire it.
Yep.
If they say yes and it makes sense, do it. But if you call the number in that email, they'll answer.
Yep. Yeah, and there are ways.
Yeah.
And there are ways also that make sure your bank, for example, calls when there are certain amounts or things don't look right and different things of that sort. And a lot of banks will let you set your own tolerance level, right? And like, it's not, hey, I'm just randomly going to call you when this transfer goes through. I'm going to call you based on typically, a lot of things, a certain amount of money going offshore when I've never seen it. Some of the normal triggers a bank would do as well.
Yeah, and some of the banks, so we've actually had this happen. Some of the banks will insist on talking not to the lawyer, but to the client to make sure that the wire number is correct and that we're going to the right place and all of that. So so some of the banks are inserting themselves in that. But yeah, you can. There's a lot that you can do, and these are all financial controls, right? These are having appropriate financial controls, and that is really, really important. This is not a cyber issue; it's a financial control issue.
Right. Yeah, the cyber aspect of it is, it is a underlying capability that they use, just like they would use, IT systems and anything else, right? And there are ways, obviously, to better protect email, with multi-factor authentication, monitoring to make sure that, activities aren't happening from impossible, types of connections, different scenarios like that as well. But at the end of the day, as you said, a simple insertion of a phone call could save you tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars by taking 10 seconds to pick up and validate, before you press send.
Yeah, and look, we've seen law firms, their clients being sent fake emails, fake invoices. Now, it may get sent to non-clients also, but they get some clients in there. So they don't necessarily know who the clients are, but they'll send invoices to some big companies saying, hey, they probably do work with them. And actually there may be clients listed on a website. And so then the client gets an invoice. Now, it came from a system. We had nothing to do with it. Our systems were not compromised, right? This happens all the time. And if somebody wires, we wouldn't know. We wouldn't be expecting it. It would be just, they'd have to contact us and say, hey, did you get this? And they might never do that. You wouldn't find it for a long time. So it doesn't have to be a system being compromised at all. It's just that, somebody got tricked into doing it. And the way that people get tricked, it can happen through phone calls, it can happen through emails, it can happen through somebody getting into a system. It is fraud. They're very good at tricking people into this particular type of fraud.
Yeah, and it is, again, FBI report data, the amount of fraud in 2021 increased 3 times over what it was, from 2 billion all the way up into almost $7 billion. And so it is one of those things that often also gets swept under the radar of most companies and most public released information. There's lots of laws that say if you get compromised and lose PII data, you need to, report on that. Fraud, on the other hand, there's some new stuff that's starting to come out to talk about that. But generally speaking, it's optional for a lot of businesses to report that. And because, like you said, somebody said yes, they often don't want to do that. Even like business email compromise, we get a ton of cases every year that don't go through insurance because they want to kind of, stay below the radar in the grand scheme of, what occurred with a BEC or any type of fraud.
Yeah, that happens on a regular basis. We had one where a client, smaller investment company, their investor actually got tricked into wiring an email through a business email compromise, but it got stopped. It was fortunate the bank stopped it. The timing was good. And then, after going through the whole review of the email, there's no personal information in there. There's no notification requirement. No, customer was harmed. So there's no notification requirement, and there wouldn't be under, even the newer things that are coming out, because the harm it ended up not happening. So there's a lot more of this that goes on than you would think. That one was lucky. I've had other ones that weren't lucky.
Yep. Yeah, and I think a lot of these types of situations are appropriate for the size of the business. They don't want to raise the bank's controls around fraud. So it won't always be a multi-million-dollar transaction. That would probably fly under the radar of a Fortune 500, right? But small businesses with a BEC or any type of other phishing exercise, for example, might be thousands of dollars. But if you're getting, hundreds of those a day, it's not a bad amount of money coming in relative to a relatively easy exercise in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, and unfortunately, so there have been some reports of some law firms that have gone out of business when they were subject to, they wire fraud. They wired out money. It was client money, so they were responsible for it. Cyber insurance, we can talk about this, doesn't cover it because somebody voluntarily initiated it. It doesn't fit into cyber. It may fit into there are other insurance out there. There's crime or fraud insurance that might do it. And so you'd have to have the right insurance, and then you could have coverage. But yeah, there are people who have gone out of business from this. It's really unfortunate.
Yeah. And again, definitely on the rise. I mean, we see it every day. Clearly the trends show this every day. And so I'm sitting here, I accidentally hit the send button. I didn't pick up the phone to make a simple phone call. I realized immediately that something's wrong here. What do you do? There's a number of things in life that you should be prepared for and think about in advance. Obviously on incident response side, we're always telling customers the better prepared you are, the better you're going to be able to react. And obviously having a few people do things in parallel, especially when time is of the essence, is critical as well. But talk a little bit about a couple of the things that you've seen, that are the immediacy requirements associated with a lot of these types of events.
Well, on that one, if you just hit send and told the bank to initiate the wire, and you have any doubt, call the bank and have them hold it.
Yep.
Right? Like, don't call anybody else first. Call the bank. If you work for a company, you can call the bank while you are typing an email to somebody else. But it's better to have a wire held and go a little later. Say, hold this. I need to check and make sure this is legitimate. So don't initiate it yet. We'll reconfirm it. That would be the best thing to do. Sometimes they call me, and I tell them, call the bank right now and call me back.
Right. Yep. Yeah. And I think this is where planning comes into place, right? Like, people don't cancel wire transfers frequently. So they don't know the number to the bank. They don't know what hotline to call. They don't know what to do. Sometimes, because a lot of these things are delayed transaction, most banks hold it for a short period of time. You can do it online, right? And I would call too, right? Like, not just click the button, first of all, to cancel it, but also pick up the phone and call the line. And again, knowing what button to press, knowing what number to call, know what language to say about what you're trying to accomplish, and what receipts you should get, what validation you should get. All those things are things you can plan ahead. And if you've got that easy access to you, what might take an hour and a half, 2 hours of stress trying to figure out all these things is going to take you minutes, 10 minutes, max.
Yeah. So, and that's in the finance team. They should have, it's their own form of incident response. When we talk about incident response, we're usually thinking about cyber things, and you call it the CISO. And that's not, in the financial team, the controllers team, or whoever it is that is responsible for wire transfers. They should have those numbers. They should know who to call, and say, may have wire fraud here, hold this wire. right? And if you have to, call the main line at the bank if you don't know, and say that, and hopefully those people are well enough trained, they should be, that they'll get you to the right place. But every second that you wait, that wire may go. Now, if you do it quickly, still may be able to catch it at the next bank. But if it's a few hours, you may or may not be able to.
Yeah, and these fraudsters know the timing of everything, right? So they're going to do it at certain times of the day that either have the highest probability of getting somebody to do it, end of day, urgency, whatever it may be, right before the banks close, so that the wire transfer goes through that night and nobody really realizes it until the next day. Things of those sort are the tricks of the trade for those types of people. Now, I will say what we often see is the celebration of I stopped the wire fraud, and they forget to tell everybody about how it actually got initiated to start with. And so now people are sitting around 24, 48 hours with the same cyber problem they have: a compromised account, a phishing email that nobody else is catching, all those types of things. And that just leads to that yet, secondary but successful transfer as well.
Yeah. So when I get those calls, make sure that there is some sort of investigation done. It may not be, you may or may not hire a forensic firm for this, but you need to understand what happened and what broke down in it, because something broke down, actually probably multiple things, and you need to put appropriate controls in place, and that you have to. Celebrate for 5 minutes and then make sure those things in place. And then when you got those things in place, then you can really have that celebration. Yeah,
perfect. And then, so we talked about, obviously, call the bank first, or engage with the bank to try to stop it as quickly as possible. We talked about having a plan ready so you can do all those things really quickly. But sometimes law enforcement can help as well. Because payments go through SWIFT and different things like that have certain controls. Some are set at 72 hours, nothing's set in stone. But if you can't catch the bank, still keep trying, right? So
absolutely. Well, absolutely. So here's the thing: if you want to have any hope of getting an insurance recovery from whatever policy might respond to this, as they say in insurance, or pay, you got to make a very timely report to law enforcement. And you don't know, things get stuck. There's this, you mentioned SWIFT. If you learn about the North Koreans attacked, the Bank of Bangladesh, they stole money through SWIFT. Well, it got stuck in a bank because of some weird address that had been put on one of the things, and it got stopped there. And it got stopped there for days. And they were able to get that money back as a result. So it really, you don't know. So don't assume that you can't, and keep going on every angle that you can, think of, and call in the experts. They'll help, right? I mean, the incident response people that Doug and Pondurance have, they can help move things quickly. We do as well. We may call Doug,
or vice versa, right? So.
Well, right. But if we're trying to stop something that's going on right at that moment, if you get people who you don't know it, you get people who do know it, you have a chance of things going the right way.
Yeah, and the IC3 is a online capability provided by FBI, allows your fraud to be submitted. I would do two things, and by the way, law enforcement will tell you this as well, is one, go ahead and submit it online, because it asks you a lot of the pertinent information. It gets all the information that they're going to need. but then pick up the phone and call the local FBI group as well, because every state has a group of people that are assigned. Sometimes they are in the cyber group, sometimes they are, in the fraud group. But all of those teams work together and you'll get routed to the right person. And this is not just a US problem only, obviously. So of the reports to IC3, again, reading through the FBI report, over 70 countries reported through IC3 of fraud attempts or fraud that was actually accomplished as well.
Yeah. It's hard to emphasize that enough, that and not just going through the online system, but actually getting to somebody, because they will try to help. This is an area especially where an FBI agent could actually help something that's going on right then. They with cyber breaches, they would try, but they're not the ones in the systems. But they can actually, they know where to go for fraudulent wires to try to stop it. That is something that is, they have a lot of strength in it. So I definitely agree with that.
Yeah, and I would argue when it comes to stopping the money being transferred, I'm not going to pick up the phone and call Swift. Swift's not going to have a conversation with me. Some of these backbone payment providers, they're not going to have a conversation with me. So my two avenues are pick up the phone, call bank. Number two, pick up the phone and call FBI/submit my IC3 online. And both of those show that I did everything I should be able to do, even though a mistake was made, to your point earlier. And that's going to show well to, payments from insurance. That's going to show well to, the board. That's going to show well to everybody that you had that plan in place. You executed on the plan. You did everything possible that, you had in your plan and that everybody says you need to do. Any other things that you think, you're seeing in the marketplace or recommendations associated with, the trends of wire fraud in general?
Yeah. So one thing that I wanted to make sure to mention is for public companies and companies that are regulated by the SEC. The SEC has fined companies for not having appropriate financial controls on wire fraud. So on this specific topic, so they're the regulator that seems to have the most in that. I know the FFIEC, so the banks and credit unions, they have required controls to help to prevent it for customers, but for companies that, there are a number of companies that got fined for not having appropriate financial controls. So they're looking at it. So I would say if you fall into that, go and ask the question. Go and ask, what do we do? Like, what are our financial controls around this to prevent it? Asking that, it's a really good question to ask. And if the answer that you get is something that you don't understand, then ask it again, because this should not be really, really complicated stuff. It should be very, understandable to everybody in the organization.
Yep. So taking a step back, let's summarize kind of what we discussed here. So first of all, a lot of this occurs via phishing, email, business email compromise, and so forth. So there's lots of security controls that can be put in place by a business such as that. So for example, on BEC, business email compromise, multi-factor authentication, in many cases is going to protect against that. When it comes to phishing, obviously human training, filtering, there's all types of security controls around that. Social engineering, again, lots of capabilities, training, technology that can fit around that capability as well. When it comes to the actual training of people to look for things too. There's a lot of training capabilities that have expanded out. Sometimes they fall under cybersecurity because they're accomplished through IT. Other times, they're separate fraud modules altogether, for example. All of those are great elements. Now, you have to assume that some of those things will fail, right? And so when they fail, you need to have a plan. So I hit the button, I've done send, because I didn't do the one thing that Rick says is most important in the world, pick up the phone and validate, right? Because again, like multi-factor authentication, all these other security controls, that would have probably solved for the mass majority of problems out there. And then as soon as you have made the error, or somebody has made the error in the organization, report to the bank as quickly as possible. Report to IC3 if the bank can't make a transfer, or if you don't get an immediate reply, go ahead and file that, and call your local FBI office to be able to get them engaged and get guidance from there as well. Did I miss anything?
No, that's really it. And just once again, pick up the phone.
Yeah.
That is the that's the financial control. And don't call a number that somebody sent to you.
Right, right. Yeah, and that was kind of my opening experience, is when I was talking to this team of people. That's all they do all day long is fraud, and I was like, wow, this is pretty simple stuff here, and I don't think most people know it. So thanks for taking the time today to spend with us and educate the audience. And as always, thanks for all of the advice that you provide there.
Well, and thank you. And thank you for elevating this up. The more people who hear it, the safer we're all going to be. We need to stop this, because it's so easy. It can be stopped. And
absolutely.
Then the criminals don't get the money.
There you go. And everybody gets to keep a little bit more. So
exactly. Exactly.
Well, thanks as always, sir.
Thank you.